In this series, lowimpact.org talks with people working to build a mutually owned, democratic, decentralised economy that builds community and doesn't destroy nature. We want to increase collaboration to bring about system change. Find links to the sites mentioned in the videos in the description below. Join the conversation by liking, commenting and subscribing to our channel.
Let's get on to quotas, because so government quotas for small fishing boats. Can you explain a bit more about what that means?
Yeah, so back in the day, so in the 90s, the right to fish was changed to something that the European Parliament decided was, or European Fisheries Committee decided was called quotas. So in the annual quota discussions in the European Commission, they would allocate France, say 100 tons a year and UK 100 tons a year. That then goes back to the Marine Maritime Organization in DEFRA, and DEFRA decide what percentage of that 100 tons goes to which style of vessel, which type of vessel. The thing is, in the 90s, when the system came in place, it was the allocation was based around historical catch. And ironically, it kind of suited the small scale guys. Anything under 10 meters never had to disclose their catch. They were considered such an insignificant part of fishing that they didn't even have to record it. So who knew they were catching so much fish? Nobody knew. So this system comes in place and they're given diddly squat quota, 4%, because the government had no record or track of what they had historically caught. So they were, they hadn't complained because it kind of suited them. Who wants to do paperwork when you've come home from a day?
So just to be clear about this, so the whole of the catch for the UK, the small fishing boats. So let me just read you something that I read on your website, which just blew me away. So the UK fleet is made up of 5,911 boats, 21% of which are more than 10 meters in length, while 79% are 10 meters or smaller. Mm-hmm. The official small-scale inshore fishing definition, and the boats that Sole of Discretion work exclusively with. In terms of access to fishing rights, brackets quota, the under 10 fleet has less than 2%. So has it gone up from 2% to 4%, or was it?
No, yeah, historically it was 4. It's actually gone down as far as 2 now. So it's going
down
the wrong
to 2.
way. Yeah.
So with the larger sector taking the remaining 98% share, that just doesn't seem at all believable. It's 79% of the fleet, 2% of the quota.
It's government statistics. I'm more than happy to share the links with you. Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, it just beggars belief, doesn't it? Like, how could you possibly have come up with a system like that? But that's why, because historically the small boats weren't required to disclose how much they got. So the government just had no idea they were catching as much as they do. And this comes back to this notion that, like the supermarkets, without the supermarkets, we wouldn't be able to feed ourselves.
Yeah.
Of course we'd be able to feed ourselves. There'd be small scale grocers and fishmongers and butchers and whatever popping up all over the place like we did back in the day. So it does beg a belief. Of course, not all fish are quota species, so there'll be some species that aren't deemed commercially worthy of giving a quota to. So you can fish unquoted species. So there are sort of ways of getting around it. But the other thing about the quota system is that if you're an under 10 meter boat, you have to fish within your quota. There's no leeway around it. And one of our fishermen got caught out with that right at the beginning. And that's also on my website. But if you're a large scale boat, you can get right to the end of the calendar year before you have to settle your books. So you've got the whole calendar year to swap quota with another vessel or fish less because you think you're not going to be able to find the swap or whatever. So small scale vessels can buy in quota as kind of larger ones, but often that means, of course, that they're buying in quota for maybe £4 a kilo and they're only getting potentially £3.80 on the market for the quota that they bought. So the slipper skipper sitting in their mansions in foreign countries are getting that 20p extra. Well, they're getting the £4, but yeah.
So is there any scope for getting that changed? Is the government amenable to talking about changing that?
They are actually, and the government, curiously enough, some 5-6 years ago, was sitting on side with Greenpeace. I mean, who would have thought Greenpeace and the government were together in the High Court, as the Cornish PO took them to court over allocation of quota. So they were taking, and this was a while back and my memory isn't brilliant, but I think it was under 2% of quota from the bigger vessels, and the government was allocating this to the small scale sector. And this was actually unused quota. So the bigger vessels had this quota, they weren't even using it. So the government said, great, this is unused quota, we won't get into trouble with the EU, we'll just reallocate it. But of course it sets a precedent. So they spent an awful lot of money and an awful lot of time taking the government to court over this misallocation of quota, which was something tiny, 1 or 2%. And the court ruled against them. So the government and Greenpeace won. So there is appetite to change things. And I know Richard Benyon was the fisheries minister a while back, and he was really great on small scale.
Right, okay, so there's no government position against small fishers. It's the will is there to help them.
Yeah, and even the EU, and it's a shame we left the EU for so many reasons, but they were saying that all quota from now on has to be allocated on environmental, social, and profit. So it can't just be allocated on economic interest any longer. It had to be allocated on those 3 pillars: environmental, social, and economic. I mean, brilliant. And of course, we can choose to ignore that now because we're not part of the EU, but EU is saying any new quota has to be allocated across those 3 pillars, which is fabulous. So I think everybody is recognizing the benefit of these small scale fishers collectively. And they are just harder to manage.
A national government policy, might that change in the same sort of direction?
Oh God, I mean, look at Brexit, the whole thing that was held up. And, the fishers that I spoke to that, for the vast majority did vote for Brexit because they simply believed that, of course, we would get back the rights to fishing within the 12 nautical miles so that no foreign vessels could come within our jurisdiction of waters, which goes up to 12 miles. So essentially, the small scale guys naively believed that the 12 miles would automatically come back to UK vessel only ownership. And they were sold that line pretty much down to sort of December of last year. It was extraordinary. And then when the results actually came out and you look at what was happened, I mean, the quota distribution, firstly, we didn't get that 12 nautical miles. It was back to the 6, so there's no difference for them. You still got these massive foreign trawlers sitting at 6 nautical miles, hoovering up what they consider their entitlement. I'm not sure I would say that. I just object to the fact that it's so huge, taking, one vessel, taking so much. But the quotas that they thought they were going to get just simply didn't materialize. So they just absolutely weren't benefiting one jot from this Brexit negotiation. It was extraordinary. It was held up because of these fishers. I mean, it's laughable.
So something else I read on your website, something over 50% of the UK's national quota is owned by foreign interests, with one Dutch super trawler company owning 25%. These super trawlers can fish up to the 6 nautical mile limit, limiting the number of fish that make it through to be caught by the thousands of small scale boats. Plus, it limits the ability of the small scale fishers to leave their static nets out beyond 6 nautical miles for fear of the super trawlers towing it away. Surely something can be done about that. There's nothing. That sounds crazy.
The whole thing's Wild West, isn't it? And I think we've got something like 2 boats that monitor the British coastline. I mean, it's just crazy. Whereas the French, when they've got a problem, they throw monitoring vessels at the problem, which is why you had the Scallop Wars and people chucking scallops at one another in the last, I think it was last summer or the summer before. So the French really protect their coastline. They put vessels to monitor it. The UK really doesn't, but it's legal. You know, it's legal to do that. If the foreign vessels would say, well, if you're stupid enough to leave your static nets out in the course of a path that I'm perfectly entitled to trawl, that's your bag, you know, it's not my lookout, it's yours. So yeah, so many things to do, right, Dave? So many things to improve. But what I would like for people to be able to say, well, I don't want to eat fish caught from that vessel that's so environmentally and socially disruptive. That's my first goal. And even if it's a tiny first step, and from then you can build. So I don't know if now is the time to talk about this, but I'm working potentially with the Soil Association to help define a differentiation for low impact, small scale and bigger. And I'd like to work with the Soil Association rather than create a new logo or a new brand, because there are so many out there and they're already very confusing. And I think the Soil Association does have clout. It's not perfect potentially, but it's pretty damn good. And I think anybody with ethical considerations will say, okay, the Soil Association has given this method a means of identifying small over large, and they think that's better, so that's good by me. That's enough for the consumer to make their first step in choice. So with them, we would be looking exclusively at low impact, small scale vessels. And then, you know, you've got to start somewhere. And my hope would be that if they could get slightly better prices, although I say that now, and in the last 6 months, fish prices have been extraordinarily high. I mean, unprecedentedly high. So I'm really glad that right at the beginning, you said you felt our fish box was reasonable value. Thank you for saying that, Dave, because
I mean, really, not just reasonable, really good value, really good value. I mean, it's like,
well, thank you.
Half the price of the fish chip shop.
Yeah, £15 a kilo for bass. That's what the fishermen get on the quay. That's before we've gutted it, filleted it, packed it, put it on a lorry, sent it up to London or wherever we're going to send it. Fish prices are crazily high. And where we set out initially to provide a stable income for the small scale boats, they sort of, and throughout the second lockdown, when fish prices collapsed, that really came into its own. Many of the small scale guys wanted to land to us and get fair prices. But since COVID restrictions have been lifted, prices are just ludicrously high. It's like, whoa, go out and catch one turbot and you've made £100 for the day. One fish, you know, it's just crazy. So yeah, where was I going with that? Yeah, so but with the Soil Association to create a standard that we can then work from, and maybe eventually we could use that standard as a sort of leverage to the fishermen to say, if you want your name on this pack of fish and you want to guarantee that you've got a better price for your fish, you may have to incrementally change the way you fish. So you might want to get them fishing with a slightly bigger mesh size. Or you might want to get them to... Oh,
so the small fish, the younger fish can escape.
Yeah. And that would need a transition period, because of course they'd say, well, we won't catch anything for 3 years. So they need to be compensated for maybe over that 3-year period. But that's not unknown to the government. They have compensated when they've decommissioned larger vessels, for example. Taxpayers have paid for it. So there is a historic method for doing that, albeit for a different reason. You may want to say, well, let's close areas off in peak spawning. A lot of fish spawn sort of January, February, March time. Let's reduce our fishing effort in that time. Let's just let them spawn, and they produce millions of eggs, these things. So I reckon it would really not take long. I mean, maybe even only 2 years, but certainly 3, 4, 5 to actually recover the fisheries pretty significantly and pretty quickly. And for me, that's, and many of the fishermen we talk to, they agree, but it has to be done collectively, right? There's no point them saying, well, we won't fish when other vessels and other larger vessels are allowed to. So I'm hoping with the Soil Association, we can present arguments to government with the buy-in of the fisheries fraternity to suggest things to them, and that government are always looking for easy wins, right? If there's somebody else that's come up with the solution, then they feel they can back it, then they'll do it. If they're seen as the bad guy, then the bigger bigger vessels will simply lobby them to death. So I want to present the government with an alternative, with an easy alternative. Well, nothing's easy.
Good luck. There was one more thing that I saw on your website.
Yeah, thank you.
There was one more thing that I saw on your website. It said another point to note is that the small scale fishers were never permitted to own their own quota, unlike the large scale operators who sold a lot of their quotas. So the small scale fishers weren't allowed to own their quotas, but the big ones were.
So the big ones have the ability to trade with one another. So the producers' organisations pool the quota for them. The smaller boats, I mean, that's a historic thing as well. They weren't, because they didn't have the historic catch record. It was part of an allocation that went to the small scale fishers as a group. It wasn't necessarily assigned to the boats and to the individual fishers. So it's divvied up amongst the boats on an annual basis. So a lot of the problems with any new fisher coming in is that they could buy a boat, but that boat doesn't come with a right to fish. It doesn't come with a quota. Whereas the bigger boats, they do come with quota. You could buy a big boat. Well, who could buy a big boat? But they probably cost millions. You could buy a big boat with its quota attached to it. The small vessels for somebody new coming in wouldn't benefit from that.
Right.
You'd have to buy it in on top of the boat.
So what can people do to help or become your customer? I guess that's one thing they can do.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say that we will, with the Sole Association, spawn lots of little similar things around the UK coast. That's what I'd like to see.
That's what I wanted to ask. Do you think there's a scope for this being sort of replicated all around the UK coast?
I'd really like to hope so, because we can't supply to all the ethical consumers in Britain. It's just not possible.
Yeah, and
why would we want to? So
yeah, exactly. It'd be better if you just focused on Devon and Cornwall, wouldn't it? It would be
absolutely
reduce the fish miles.
Yeah, and then enable other communities around the coast to follow the template and supply into. So it'd be a bit like a sort of Schumacher thing, where you've got an umbrella organisation that gives you guidance and support and know-how, and then the small scale boat groups of fishers around the coast can all work to that standard.
Yeah, it
does have to be standardised, and I think just the way health and safety and supermarkets operate now, the standards are so onerous from a health and safety point of view that it makes small scale fishing communities really hard to achieve those. So we'd have to kind of work on that level. That's
one of the things that we've found. The large industrial agriculture finds it easy to meet the regulations. It's a smaller percentage of their income, whereas we're trustees of a small organic farm in Wales. Yeah, and they produce cheese, and it's beautiful big cheddar cheese, and they can't sell them to the public because they'd have to spend £50,000 on stainless steel equipment for the kitchen, and they don't need it. It's a lot of it is a response to the foot and mouth and a lot of these problems that we saw in agriculture, and they weren't caused by the small producers. They were caused by giant industrial agriculture, and it's the small producers who have to pay.
Yeah, exactly that. It's small is beautiful. So
yeah,
arm the small scale guys with the know-how. That's what I'd like to achieve from the Sole Association project. This is the standard. It's not as onerous as supermarkets. It works on the human scale. Who wants to work with a load of stainless everywhere and, I don't know, whatever. It has to work on the human level. It has to be a place of enjoyment where you go to work, and I think it's a privilege and a joy to be working with these creatures from the sea. They're stunning things that come out of the sea.
Yeah. So I'll put your details below the video, and I'll put them at the top of the blog article, and I hope you get some more customers. Just final question. If you had a magic wand, what would you do? What's the most important thing that you would change?
As a very quick answer to everything, and I don't know how you compensate the fishermen, but I do think it would be closing the sea in peak spawning time. And even if that's for 2 or 3 weeks, you just need to let these fish come in, do their business and float off. And as long as these little eggs are in the sea, fertilized eggs are swimming around, there's a chance. And that can be for such a short period, actually.
What time of year usually?
January, February, March.
Thank you very much. Okay. Caroline, it's been fantastic speaking with you.
Likewise, Dave. It's so nice to team up with fellow anarchic people in the world of food.
That's the word. I hope that comes back into fashion soon.
Yeah.
All right,
You've got to be
Caroline.
a bit mad, haven't you?
Yeah, lovely speaking with you. And
Likewise.
yeah, I'll let you know when this is up, and yeah, hopefully we're definitely going to stay customers for a long time.
Thank you. Well, thanks for your kind words, Dave. Onwards and upwards. Okay. All right. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.